You drop to your knees before guards. I drop them, pop them right between the eyes.
We are gods. Considering our discussion about God of War just before this, it's quite funny.
Yeah, that is well aware of the universe. That is Cyberpunk's Johnny Silverhand. Welcome to Silly Whales. This is a mental health podcast. I nearly said brought to you by Manscaped again.
Aye, mate.
Like it's so on the tip. It's so on the tip. There we go. We talk about things to do with mental health, and we discuss things that you might not want to hear or might not be in the right headspace to hear. This podcast is for everyone, but it might not be for you. It isn't brought to you by Manscaped. That always comes into my head. I've actually did. This is gonna make me sound like an absolute nerd. I did buy a Manscaped package because my Manscaped razor broke, and everyone is very quick to tell me Manscaped is the worst, but they don't understand that I didn't have a need for Manscaped until I was like 20 something, and I'm still 20 something. So they were the brand that got to me first. So then I was just like, yes, cool enough. And I got a discount because of the old YouTube channel that I had. And I was like, cool. They didn't sponsor me. They gave me like a 50% discount code. So like their little razor was like £90. It was then like 30 or 40. And I was like, this is incredible. Best day of my life. And it's lasted me well. When it broke after like 3.5 years, they sent me another one. And I was like, okay, cool. Great customer service. I love it. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to buy the latest model. It's on sale, plus a discount code, plus like a free box of briefs, random other stuff I don't really need. But yeah, you know, I'm a minimalist, I swear.
Dude, I was just thinking how me and Kez were talking about this the other day, because we were talking about like the limits you can go to for local shopping. You know, like the amount to which you have to pay before it becomes exploitative of yourself. And you know, you need to be like, well, I can't afford to just pay for everything. I can't afford to go local for everything, basically. And you know, there's a reason. I can see why like you have to. I understand it on an emotional and personal level, so I'm not being like, oh, how can someone do that? It's more that I think it's better that we should be doing less like chain stuff and things like that. And I actually don't know what the quality is of fucking Manscaped, but I've dealt with my life pretty fine without it. Let's just put it that way.
I have heard nothing but bad reviews of Manscaped from people who aren't sponsored by Manscaped. I have had little to no problems with them. I think it jammed while I was using it once, but then again, I don't use it that much. I think that's why it comes into it. A lot of the guys that use it seemingly use it on what's wrong with you, and two, what's wrong with you, and three, like in episode 3 we shill for the NHS, and now we're at episode 23. I hope we're now shilling for Manscaped. How we've already become corrupted here.
No, listen, I shield for the NHS. You are shilling for Manscaped. These are the lines drawn in this podcast, right?
Do you know, like the fable, good or bad, like the line in the middle, like who are you going to be? Yeah, which we were discussing off air. Like that. There we go. We have NHS and Manscaped.
I will say, I'm just going to call it. I think that, like a lot of products that exist in the advertising space, I think I'm not saying that they're the same as Raid Shadow Legends, but I think that they are the Raid Shadow Legends of that kind of product. And I think it's just also just a case that there aren't that many things at the time, at least, that were pushing themselves as men-specific like products in that area. So I imagine that there's many more products that are better than Manscaped. I don't know that for sure, but that's generally true of anything that you hear a lot about, is that there's something better than you just haven't heard of. So
but if Manscaped do want to sponsor us, they are number one. They are number one. And like, I don't think you understand, Joe. Like, they have revolutionized. Do you know what? I do have to actually have a bit of a go at the football ramble here. Okay, Ryan's going to shoot me on site. But they have an advert, which is, shit you not, Joe, is 3.5 minutes long. a mid-roll advert, and they discuss like shaving, why the new Manscaped Lawnmower 5.0 is the best, and they do it like they're having a podcast conversation, and it's like 3.5 minutes plus the 3.5 minutes ads at beginning and end of every episode. Guys, I know you're getting the bag here, but can you make it a little bit smaller? Like, you know,
Yeah. And we're talking about this way too much, but technically we're talking about advertising rather than talking about the product. But I realize there's just a lot of discussion about this product now. So I'm just, let's move on. Let's move on.
Someone's gonna
give this too much light.
Someone's gonna get this clip and be like, our boys before they got corrupted. Like, and then like play like the future us, and it's like a live episode, and we're both wearing Manscaped. Well, no, you're wearing a Donate Blood shirt, and I'm wearing like full Manscaped gear, wearing a Pornhub cap, like, you know. Got the Raid Shadow Legends wristband and headband, sweatbands all around me. Great.
Yeah.
But
how have you been, mate? How have you been?
I've been great. I've been. That's a lie, but
we can talk about in relative terms if you know.
I've been better than expected.
Very good.
Got back into the gym yesterday. Just like I found myself the last few weeks struggling to get the energy to do both Muay Thai, football, and the gym and all that stuff as well. Finally got the ability to go back to the gym late at night. It was a good little workout. I'm like, okay, cool. And normally it takes like 2 sessions for me to regain strength properly. But I was regaining strength like the third set of bench pressing, and I was like, okay, cool, we're back. We're so back. It's crazy. Like we discuss. I don't think we've discussed body dysmorphia on here as much. I think that's actually is a presents episode on that. That we have planned. If not, we must write it down. But it's like you look in the mirror and you're like, oh my god, I used to be like this, and odds are you never were like that. You were just in your head. You felt like that, you know. So it's like getting yourself to feel like that again, but also understanding that even if you don't look like that or feel like that, you still look great and all that stuff. I don't know. Body positivity is a really weird discussion to have because people lean too far in one direction, people lean too far in another direction. Like with most things, sadly. Like, oh, you look great the way you are. Like, cool, that's all good. That's all good and all, but how you look and how you feel are very different things, you know. They're very different on every single level.
Yeah, well, and also like I feel like there's levels of judgment you can make about people that are just not levels of judgment you should make, but that doesn't affect the fact that there are impacts and implications to what happens if you like live a certain kind of lifestyle, which ends up making you look one way or the other. You know what I mean? Like it's not like we can have this discussion in an understanding about like personal expression and things like that and judgment, and then there's another a discussion that we can have mutually alongside it, which is about things like health. You know, like someone can say how much it makes them feel good to have to be really skinny, for example, but we can talk about the health implications that has on them for example for doing so. So we're allowed to talk about. You're allowed to be someone who essentially defends or champions that someone should be allowed to do what they want to do, but at the same time, like have a recognition about the actual health implications and what does that mean then as far as what we should be doing societally and how we should look at ourselves. But yeah,
like I know like a few bodybuilders and like ex-professional wrestlers who've steroids in their lifetime, and like I don't know. I think I can say I know like 15 to 20. And out of all of those guys, I think only like 3 or 4 have outwardly come out and said they regret ever doing it. Because again, like the idea that, like steroids are bad, full stop. And I have a very weird view on it, which people go, oh, how could you? It depends who you talk to. Rational people don't really care about like how middle of the road my viewpoint is. People who aren't really rational have very like, oh my god, how could you? So like my viewpoint is always this: do whatever you want, like with most things. The John Stuart Mill's harm principle applies. As long as you don't hurt anybody else, and that also includes by hurting yourself because people depend on you, then do what you want. Steroids have been around for decades and has been used for a variety of different reasons. If managed properly, you will not have horrific side effects. And the side effects you do have, you can manage. As long as you understand what a post-cycle therapy is, as long as you understand that you are altering who you are as a person, possibly on an emotion level, but most importantly on like a actual like who you are as your body, the science around your body is changing, especially things like testosterone, especially things like SARMs and things like that as well. As long as you know what you're actually doing, then by all means do whatever it is. You take your cycles, get your blood work checked. I would have done it. But stupid mistakes earlier in my life have made that not an option because I legitimately probably die if I take steroids. Just how my body reacts to anything like that. And that was the first
Do
thing
you
the doctor
mean
told me.
do you mean in that consistent a way in that like dosage, or do you just mean like any steroids, like if you needed them for medical reasons in future?
For medical
Like,
reasons, I can probably like hack it, whatever. But something like if I were to take, I don't know, for mental reasons, like I don't have an addictive personality at all, which is a problem. But it's more down to, like if I were to ingest like a extreme like what's the one that like a clen, for example, which like does a lot of like fat burning, things like that, gets you shredded, but also pumps your heart like wild. I'll probably die. A
yeah,
lot
because
of
that's
these
the
things
reason, right?
affect your heart.
It's the
Yeah,
cardiac side that
yeah.
affects you. Yeah.
That's the thing is like the likelihood of it actually affecting me is like 0.05, but it could, and it knowing me and my luck, it probably will. So let's not. And yeah, I had like it was about 6 years ago. I had a conversation with doctors like, "Oh, are you taking anything like steroids or whatever?" It's like, no, good because like of the issue with the whole heart thing. If that gets that, he didn't even say the scientific thing behind it. He just said, "If there's an issue there, oof." That's literally what he said. There's an issue there, oof. And I was like, "That's enough. That's enough. You don't have to say anything else." That is the message loud and clear. But like,
Yeah,
if
very
I could,
colloquial
yeah,
explanation.
if I could have, I would have. But also, it comes down to mentally as well. I can't stay on a dose. Like I will forget to take it. So it took like the better part of 8 months to consistently remember to take my ADHD medication. Like to get used to taking like an antidepressant at night, for example. It took like near a year. I can't build that routine of doing something every single day just for 8 weeks because it'll take me 8 weeks to just do it. Like, so I'll miss so many days, and the effects just won't be beneficial to me at all.
Yeah,
Um,
I get you.
but yeah, like, and that's where it will click. You know, went to the gym, it was all fine. Like had Muay Thai on Monday. No, I had football yesterday as well. So yesterday was football and then gym afterwards. Yeah, and then like played for I had Muay Thai on Friday, and I was like, yeah, I feel like I'm getting a lot better. There's a lot of I've got a weird knee injury. I got like bruising around my knee and it was swelling a little bit. I got kicked in a game I played last week and it hasn't gone down properly. So my movement's a bit restricted. Like during football, I couldn't run properly. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. And it brought me back to how I felt when I was like a professional wrestler pretty much. And I was like, I felt like I looked good, especially towards the end, like right before COVID. I was like pretty lean. I was like, yeah, cool. But I was so slow. And that's what I felt again. I was like, oh wow, this is why you like pivoted off into martial arts, especially because you didn't want to be that slow.
Yeah.
like, like, so I was like, well, good. It's a good wake up that you're on the right track. But yeah, aside from that, not much has happened.
Yeah, you're on your 6 week holiday now. Well, at the very least, well, probably at the maximum 6 weeks, right? Because it might
Yeah,
change. Um,
yeah,
but you're at the point where now me and you can be having a conversation on the 6th of August, Tuesday, and we can actually record an episode at I mean, we could have had this way earlier, but that was my fault, and unfortunately, EE's fuckery. But
yeah,
um, but like we can have more episodes, which I kind of just want to mention a little bit because we've had a bit of time now. Like we had the holiday stuff, which affected schedule. Then there was a week that we have essentially skipped by. I don't know when this will go out, but there has been a week that we have not recorded for. I assume this is how I feel anyway. I assume that we're going to try and get back to like at least one journal episode a week and things like that.
Yeah, I actually don't think we missed a week properly.
I think we have because I was on holiday. I wasn't on holiday last week and we didn't record during that week.
The last episode went up, I think it was 8 days ago.
Yeah, but it basically just means that's a whole week ago, right? So when this episode goes out, it will be like I don't know when it will happen, but
This episode will probably go out tomorrow, like tomorrow morning, actually.
Okay, I mean, if it ends up being like that, then fair enough. But like, it's still a little bit elongated, right? And I commend you for doing the work for that. But like, essentially, that we're going to try and get back on track because obviously we have created this space. A few things have come up, like for different reasons. Something I realized I didn't even say on the last episode, which is odd. Considering you can actually tell in my voice. I mean, it's maybe hard to tell because I wasn't even. I said I was using a phone, which is true. So the microphone was already different. But I was recovering from being really, really sick on holiday. Completely didn't mention that while during that conversation. In fact, I noticed that I said very little about my actual holiday, about the experience of doing different things, because I literally wasn't really thinking properly. I couldn't like get my thoughts together and things like that, and the way I was speaking was more monotone and stuff because I couldn't like emote as well. I had problems where like if I breathed too much, it would cause me to cough and things like that. So on that day I was okay, but I was literally recovering from and still really experiencing and still kind of like leering back from like being sick on holiday. Loved the holiday anyway, like obviously, but it was just a weird thing that came out of nowhere. And I don't think I've been sick in that way, like in either a very long time or ever. Like I'm sure I have been, but I can't in sort of like a more recent memory imagine it. So today I may or may not talk about some things about the holiday if I think it matters, but we'll see. However, there then came news last week for me specifically, which I don't think really affected our schedule, but maybe meant that we didn't kind of push anything, which was that my granddad had died. The granddad that I had very recently mentioned on episodes, like I can't remember which episode it was, 21 or 20, but I'd mentioned about my family and stuff. And he died. Died at the house. I still don't think we quite. Well, it's not been available to me at least, or not said to me like exactly what happened. But I have a feeling that it was a mixture of dehydration mixed with, and him being old. I should be clear. Him being old is the reason, but like it's the fact that he probably wasn't drinking as much because he was very dehydrated, and it was very hot recently, and it looks like he was like lifting something and then maybe had a heart attack as like during it, or maybe fell over during it or whatever. But you know, kind of the sort of thing you would expect essentially when you're that old, and chances of things going wrong just become very high. Honestly, it's miraculous he lived for as long as he did, given how many accidents he seemed to have. And get away with it, like not even go to hospital. Like he fell off it like a fucking garden wall, like at one point in his 80s, and just somehow like while being arthritic, by the way, I should mention, and like apparently just uh, like fucking dusting it off, which I think is incredible. I remember him literally showing me where it happened. I was like, "How are you not dead?" And he was like, "I don't know." So, like, you know, this are the kind of conversations we had. Or I was like, "How did something not happen to you?" I think is how I would have phrased it. I would have been a little bit more polite than that, like you know, because I recognize that he's still quite traditional in that way. But you know, he was also someone who grew up in Second World War and saw a bomb shelter across the street get bombed out, and I think the door wasn't closed properly, so the bomb happened outside and killed everyone inside because everyone's lungs got destroyed from the pressure or something like that. So, a pretty sick, like he's had his like fair share of seeing death and things like that, which definitely had an impact on his life. Because I did give him a lot of shit in that episode, and I kind of didn't like it because I recognized that it makes it sound like he's just an absolute shithead, which he wasn't. I was talking about like the worst sides of people like him, like as in of his generation and younger, which I will end up talking about today for a completely different reason.
Yep.
And he, and in reality, like he was a complicated individual with some uncomplicated ideas who, as he was getting older, and to be honest, throughout his life, had some bad positions and not something that, and a person I wouldn't have enjoyed being around and interacting with if I was around him, with who I am now. Obviously, I'm not pretending that if I grew up at his time period, I wouldn't have been the same, but just who I am as a person. Also recognizing that his family wasn't an amazing family. I think his mum was fine, but like his dad was a bit of a weird individual, and he has a lot of he talked about his dad with a lot of pride, but his dad also but also there are things that he said to my mum about his dad that meant that it was quite clear that his dad was a bit of a shithead, and not very great with him. His sister, who I've never met, like you think I would have met this woman, but I've never met her in my life, and she was I think she's dead now, but like she was alive while I was alive. Was like this recluse person who had completely cut ties off with everyone, and not in a good way, like not in like this person was free from something. Like no, she was her own form of like weird, like problem individual. Just but essentially you start to see like where these things can come from, right? And not to mention, I think I talked about the fact that I'm pretty sure that he probably had what would be considered like a autism or something to that nature. I can imagine him actually having grown up with that and acting in a certain way as a result, which just meant getting no support and having no societal like help in terms of understanding oneself or anything like that. So I will judge him, but I will judge him recognizing that it's not inevitable, but that expectation is there. But also recognizing that he's obviously had to deal with a lot of shit in his life, and I can understand his progression from it. This is all to say that he was a man and he is dead now, but he had a life and he was a person. And I know the last time that I saw him was a few months ago. And I won't ever see him again. And I don't know if I'll go back to his house ever again, but I might never see that house ever again, or I might never see the things that we used to do, like going to the garden especially and doing stuff there. It's one of the things that pushed us to go, especially, was that he needed obviously a lot of help because he couldn't do everything himself. And so it's just a big, it's going to be a big part of I wouldn't say it's a big part of my life for the last few months because I hadn't been there, but certainly while I was living in London, I would go up every time my mum went. So it was a big part of my life for quite a long period of time that I would go see him and help take care of him in those ways. And astonishing that he was able to live on his own for about 14 or so years without his wife. My gran died like about 14 years ago. So he lived or about 13, something like that. A very long time for a man on average to be living as long as he has, with not only his wife dead, but like on his own, not in a care home, all of this other sort of stuff. Pretty extraordinary individual in that way. So yeah, just to give all of that out there. Go on.
I was just gonna say, I remember when I lost my grandmother. Like, it feels like yesterday, but it was legitimately close to 6 years ago now. Actually, they're human beings, which is what made them incredible people, and they're flawed as well.
Yeah.
So it's like the idea that Bill Burr mentions it when they say, "Oh, look, they tried to cancel John Wayne. He's been dead for 77 years or whatever it is." It's like, well, like they are people all the time, and it's easy to say, "Oh, like, I remember saying that about John Wayne. People, there's no excuse though because other actors were like, and it's like you're saying all this stuff isn't going to change anything. Like it's still he was of that time. There were flaws to him and to who he was, and we now look to not repeat the bad things, but progress and carry on the good and learn from the bad in order to create the good. And like, that's all we can really do is learn, but also be grateful for the time spent, you know, and be like, I don't know, that's how I view it with my grandma as well, who was a flawed character in her own right. But now I'm like, it's really weird because now, like, when I'm cycling, I can hear her call me. She has a very distinctive call as well. So I'm like, great. And it's like, speaking to my mum the other day about it, she said, yeah, it happens all the time. And I was like, yeah, cool, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's like those feelings that I've come about. It's like, well, yeah, the old people in our life, like the older people in our lives were flawed, but I think when they pass, they kind of become flawless in a way.
I don't know. There's parts of what you said that I disagree with in terms of I don't think we should spend a ton of energy on talking about people of the past unless they're people who have like who are used as icons with significance in a certain way while choosing to ignore other things. I think an example might be someone like Winston Churchill, which, don't get me wrong, I can understand why people use him in certain ways, but I also understand, but there's also lots of things about him that were not good, and people
No,
just
but
choose to
like,
ignore it, right?
that's the thing. Like, I think there's a big difference between a Winston Churchill and someone's nan or granddad. Well, Winston Churchill actively made a choice to hurt people, similar to that of his counterpart Adolf Hitler, and believed very similar things to that of his counterpart at the time.
Yeah.
So it's like that. There's you can look at that and go, no, he actively made those choices, and
Yeah.
he purposely hurt people horrifically like went out of his way to do so, you know? My grandma having anyone, well, to anyone from like, I don't know, Central Europe because she thought that they would be racially abusive towards like my brother, for example, is different. As there was never any malice in it. It was more of a, I've seen how people from this part of the world has treated me in this country, so why would you go over to their country to experience the same thing? Well, understanding that like the world has changed significantly, and also like one Spanish person being mean to you in the post office in 1970 something or 1980 something doesn't equate to all of Spain being racist. But like Winston Churchill, for example, actively went out of his way to cause destruction and starve people to death. So yeah.
I guess my point is that I want people to judge people kind of on like I think people should be allowed to have the judgments they have of these people in the past and talk about them with if there is true description of their actions. I think people should do. And I also think that, especially when we're talking about very cultural icons, that there is a certain level to which I think energy should be pushed towards making sure people are aware, because of the way in which, like Columbus, for example, and how
Yeah, for
how,
sure.
obviously we've seen that movement already. But the thing that I kind of recognize alongside, and within that, I believe, I don't like the sentiment that says, well, they're just of a time, because we need to recognize that it doesn't matter. Having said that, though, we need to be able to do that in a way and then move on. We don't need to, like I said, we don't need to have
Yeah.
but the problem, I think, of why this conversation tends to keep going on is because there are people on the other side putting a lot of energy against it, and I think that that's what creates that friction.
I think it's a very nuanced thing in general. It's a very nuanced thing in general because, like, if you look at, I don't know, from that time frame, the things that were normalized were things that we'll probably like, gawk at and be like, "This is disgusting. How could you?" And I've actually seen it actually more recently now, believe it or not, with like little things like builders on a construction site, and you can see the shift in like society progress. Because the guys who are older in their 60s who are like now like managers, whatever, and they do. I've never actually seen it before, but I always heard about it, but never seen it. Like a girl walks by and the guys whistle. Never actually
Yeah,
seen
that's
it
what I
before.
thought. Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to mention. Yeah.
And then I saw it like about a year ago, and I was like, wow. And like it was really funny because the guy that did it was the foreman, so he was the guy in charge. He was in his 60s, but no one else had any sort of inkling to do it because they were in like the 20s and early 30s or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So like it was like, oh, back in my day, you could do that. It seems a compliment. Da, 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 da. And like, it was like, oh, yeah, you just said back in your day. Like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you were of a time when that was okay. And now you're struggling to adapt to a time when it isn't okay. But no one's actually taking the time to explain to you why it isn't okay. And even though you have a daughter, 2 daughters actually, I think this guy actually has, you don't actually understand because they've not told you why it's a bad thing. So like you just never learn. So like in a way, he is of a time. And like no one's taken him and dragged him to the current day. And the counter argument when I brought this up recently was, well, he should just know. How do you know if you're not educated? Like if like
Yeah.
yeah, these oh yeah, but you know, like you should be able to educate yourself. Like no, not always. You know, like sometimes people need a clear example. But sometimes people need to be dragged, and it's not for you to do it. You don't have to do it, but recognize that this person's been left behind.
Yeah, and I would say also doesn't have a particular inclination to push forward. That doesn't mean that I think that majority of people even do. I think the majority of people don't, personally. So that's not a unusual statement to make. That's a very common statement I think you make of people. I don't think I'm that far ahead on that either. Like in the spectrum of that, I don't think I'm like, yeah, I'm on the opposite end where I'm just constantly. No, not at all. I'm not even remote, but I recognize that that exists. Um, to I think I think the right way of seeing it is that you like judging by the standards of now. I think is how we should understand people of the past or still exist, are still living, but are old. The difference is that judging doesn't indicate action. Acting is a very different thing, and the activity we must do must be nuanced regardless of our judgment. As in, the judgment says what is garners essentially the idea of whether there is a problem or not. The action then is, how do we deal with this, or how do I as an individual in this moment, what should I say, what should I do, if I should say or do anything at all. It might be much more impactful and useful for me to go talk to the woman that was wolf whistled at, right? That not to talk to the fucking foreman that's what I should be doing, right? It's not clear what the actual action is, but that should be the nuance, and the nuance should exist there, much as the nuance of the judgment should exist, which I don't think means that judging someone as being out of touch with the moral understandings of now. I don't think that's unnuanced to say. And I think that that's okay to say. And I think it's okay that we look back at people and judge them not just relative to their own situation, judge them for the entire person they are, especially because I think the one thing I dislike most about it is that the tendency for it to erase the fact that people do actually, and I think you did mention this, but I personally do agree with that statement that there is an erasure of people who didn't actually think that way. It kind of almost forces the idea that those people didn't exist in order for the idea that, oh, well, the norm was this, so therefore those are just the people that existed. It's like people have a weird idea about religion, for example, in Europe. People have this idea that like everyone believed everything when it came to like Catholicism in Europe, like all of the peasantry did, all of the kings did, blah blah blah. It's like not even fucking remotely. Like over time, there has been huge fluctuations and huge like disseminations of how people felt about one like thing or another, one institution, a religion, all of this stuff. It's very unclear whether in ancient Greece, how many people actually really believed that the gods existed and didn't just see them as stories, right? But the idea is that if you just paste this kind of like thing over and say, oh well, people had the Catholic ideas of that day, and so that's why they acted that way, and they didn't have any free reign of their own brain, is almost to remove the fact that people absolutely did and fought differently. And it creates, you know what I mean? It just creates this like, it just creates this sort of weird like whitewashing of European culture, weirdly in this scenario, but a whitewashing of like of history in this way, to kind of just put it in the basket or bag of like, well, that's how people fought. That was the norm. That's that, and then therefore, as a comparative judging of someone, choosing not to completely ignore it. Again, I'm not saying that you're doing that. It's just that's
No,
why these are the arguments I've come up with over time, having listened to this discussion back and forth. So
I don't know. I think it's again like it's everything's very nuanced. I think we can't blanket. It pretty much has to be a case by case basis on these things. Like, my favorite example is when you hear like someone in their 60s call someone colored, or in my case, like they'll be like, "Oh yeah, you're half caste," and like in my case, it's fairly easy to deal with. I got called half caste by like a woman in her 70s the other day, and it was a black woman. It's really funny because these words exist, and they're like, "Well, cool." And I was like, "Actually, no, I'm just black," and I love this conversation because the only person who looks stupid is the person who's arguing with it. I say I'm black. They go, "No, you're half caste." No, I'm very black, but you're half caste. Are you telling me what I am? And it kind of just ends there
yeah.
because they go, "Well, her response was, well, it's not like what you are, it's but what you look." And I was like, "Cool. I can say you look Haitian, and I know she doesn't like Haitian people,
Oh,
but
okay. Yeah.
uh, but guess what? You're black, so I can say you look from any country, really. Guess what? Is it offensive? Yeah, probably. So how do you feel like trying to change someone's race because you think that they should look a certain way? Oh, look at that. Who would have thought, eh? Oh, yeah, you have nothing to say. Things like that, But I realized, oh, yeah, that is a word that was used a lot back in like, the 80s or 70s, 60s even. You're mixed of everything, da da da. Like, the idea of interracial couples and interracial kids is still, to this very day, looked down upon as a really bad thing, actually. Um, like even I've been like excluded from certain situations. Like I've had my quote unquote blackness questioned because of it. You're not fully black though. I'm like, cool. After I'll fight to prove that I am black, and then fight against people who don't. Yeah, like I could have a whole episode about myself discussing how annoying it is to look and be a certain way. But that is going to be half this episode anyway. So
Yeah. I just want to add to that, like, just because we were talking about, because you were mentioning the use of like language to describe these things. Like, if you read anything by W.E.B. Du Bois, like he describes black people using a word I'm not going to use, but I don't know if you know that, but it's
I
also quite common. Like, it's the other N word, basically.
Negroes.
Yeah. Like, because that was a common nomenclature, right? And actually, that the use of that word has been like taken back by some groups who don't like using the other N word to describe one another, for example. Like, it's interesting, like that, like it's a whole cultural thing, right? So, but anyway, that was just because you mentioned like those particular words, and I was like, yeah, and I find that those conversations are interesting in their own different way. And of course, you do get people like that woman you mentioned. I didn't. You cut off a little bit, so I didn't quite hear what the relation was. But yeah, like, it happens. Yeah, and the other thing that's been going on, which we're going to talk about, because I think this is. I wasn't expecting this to happen so soon, but of course we mentioned it in our political sort of in our election anxiety podcast about how stuff's going to happen in between, the election and the next election. That's going to be a big thing. I don't think I quite expected it to be as big as this. And no, at the moment I'm not going to talk about Trump, because while that is a thing that I think we would have talked about what happened in the UK hadn't happened. This one is much closer to home and much more sickening, in my opinion, in terms of an actual thing that's happened recently and something that's really made me quite upset and angry. With good reason. Like, this is not a mental health mode or like bad mode of anger or upset or whatever, or like something that needs to be understood the right way. Like, no, this is like a necessary this is a necessary emotional response to the actions of a bunch of people who are using the murder of others in order to push their own agenda. So, obviously, what happened at Southport is horrific. I still want to understand more about that individual, and why this happened and everything. I don't know if that's been cleared up entirely, but it's kind of crazy that it happened. Like I was talking about with Kez, like he was 17. That's a really, really young age to do something like this. It just kind of like that on its own was like something I was like, that kind of just put me in a weird way where I was like, okay, I really want to understand more about this because this is just upsetting, right? In a way that's like, man, I can't imagine why someone would be pushed in that way. So what's going on with him? Regardless of the fact that the actions done were horrible, why the fuck did this happen? And understanding that and try, in much the way that we as a society should be shocked and react, like trying to understand something, right? But then instead, a bunch of people reacted to misinformation that they kind of knowing that some people, I imagine, were ignorant that it was misinformation. But then there were people who had but also were people that weren't ready to fact check any of the shit that they listened to or engage with because they don't care. And attempt to, and also the people who actively are pushing this misinformation out like it's real and are just continuously spouting bullshit, which has led to a shit ton of riots and has meant that that a bunch of people in this country are being persecuted illegally for the fact that they're Muslim or not white, pretty much, because there's nothing else to it. There really is actually nothing more to it than that. And you can look up the information about it, the news on it. I will. Sorry, I realize I'm entirely leading this. I want to give over to you. But just looking at more of this and like listening to people discuss this, this has brought on, like, we've talked about social media a lot in the past, and I think this is like I think this is the first time on the podcast that we've had such a perfect example of how it can be used in such a bad way, and how there are serious problems with the way social media is at the moment. And then at the same time, I think a brilliant example of how humans are just deciding to act on the basis of things that they are too lazy to fucking deal with. And social media is just an example of how they can do it. And that it's upsetting and sickening in a way, personally, genuinely has made me upset that people are. I've literally had to worry where I live, because Worcester, while I'm in a Labour area, the general areas around Worcester are not, pretty much Conservative in the last election. No reform, thank fuck. But I mean, because there weren't many reform, but there's a lot of reform voters in the country, and I was very worried because there's a large group of people here who are Muslim, and I was very worried that there could actually be riots around here. So far, I've not heard news, and so far, I've not heard of riots happening around here. But there was obviously fears in Birmingham, although it wasn't quite substantiated. And yeah, I am truly worried that something might happen here and I need to think about what I'm going to do or how I'm going to have to deal with that if it happens. Might not, totally might not. But Worcester, to me, doesn't strike me as an area where it couldn't happen, or at least somewhere near Worcester. I've heard enough opinions living around these areas, as well as many good opinions, but I've heard enough shitty opinions. You don't need many of them to do something like this. So I really fucking hope that I don't see it in my local area, because I don't know how, because I'm going to have to act. And and I know that means that could put me in danger potentially, and I really hope I don't end up so. And I really hope that police act as they should in the situation. But it's just been a little bit surreal, and at the same time, like, I keep expecting every day that I'm not going to see more riots suddenly keep showing up on the fucking news feed, and it just keeps happening. So it's a little bit discomforting to know that there is so much of this in the country, even though I already always knew that was the case. The fact that this spark is still a fire that's burning is remarkable to me, considering how bullshit so much of this started. And again, the fact that this is essentially overshadowing a murder is, and is actively not about the murder, really. It's just a scapegoat, is 100% like the most, like, I don't know. I'm pass over to you because I've got nothing more to
Yeah.
say. It's just it's
Nah.
honestly just it's just pissing me off. I was talking to myself about this, and I was using language about some of these people that I don't want to use on this because it was pissing me off so much, and I was just upset. So,
But like, that's the thing. There's 60, like we could say 67 million people in the UK. The exact number is 66.97. 4 million of them voted for reform. That is a lot of people, simply put. And that doesn't mean that there were 4 million rioters on the streets. It could be less, it could be more. Most likely a lot less.
yes, it should be.
But like, in terms of, it's not really about the protests, it's about the reaction to the protests.
Yeah.
Now, the people who are calling it a far-right protest are the people who you would expect to call it a far-right protest. The Guardian, other, like, centre-left adjacent newspapers, the odd news presenter, but it's now just called protests, or they call it riots now. As it escalates, the language changes. Back in 2011, we saw the London riots, and funny enough, what sparked that was also a death. And we look at that and we go, oh, look at that. And I remember when it was happening in 2011, the orders for the police to like resort to violence was very, very quick. Like, I remember on the news, it was like within an hour of it starting, there was a poll saying, should the police use like rubber bullets, live ammunition,
Yes,
or
I
like
remember
batons,
this.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And the amount for live ammunition was surprisingly, now it's not surprising, but at the time surprisingly high. And now we're seeing shops be looted. We're seeing people's homes be broken into. We're seeing hotels which house refugees and people who are just, homeless.
Not hotels, by the way.
Get
Buildings that
destroyed.
used to be hotels, not hotels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we see people. I've seen countless videos of people being assaulted. I've seen checkpoints in, I believe it was Middlesbrough, where they're all in the middle of the road. You drive, and if you're white, you can go through. If you're not white, they'll smash your car.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, heard that as well.
Like, I've seen multiple videos of black people, mostly black people, just being beaten up. And what's scary is the fact that I've already had to act. So, like, I meant to go out to Manchester, for example, to see one of my friends. I had to cancel that trip because they're going to be doing this for the next few days. I got intel, I'm part of an anti-racist group. I got intel that they're going to be doing this like tomorrow pretty heavily, including Walthamstow, near where I live. So that might be where I spend my Wednesday. Because they're going to go to immigration center. It's going to be great, I was like, how many racists are there in Walthamstow? Probably not that many, but how many are going to come who aren't from Walthamstow? You don't actually know. That's the issue. A lot of these people don't actually in. But none of that's actually important. The weird thing is that how many of us stand by and are idle to it? And it's not about who joins in, it's about who actually stands to stop it. And there's a lot of people who are just being like, hey, it'll sort itself out. Or like, oh, but there's a reason why they're angry. And they turn away and they walk away from it for forever. And they don't engage with it, they don't do anything with it. And the question will be asked is, oh, what are you supposed to do? What are they supposed to do? Something. Because right now, a lot of people who aren't white feel like they don't belong in this country. And there's some people who listen to the show who think, yeah, that's good. Good, we don't want them here. And the whole thing about this, that they're protesting because they've not been listened to. Cool, let me lay it out for you guys then. For the ones who really think that they've not been listened to, and for the ones who are just a bit clueless or all. The guys who are protesting claim they've not been listened to. Cool. They wanted to leave the European Union, right? We had a referendum. They were listened to. We left. Cool. You want to restrict how and where you can travel to with or without a visa. Cool, you voted for it. We left. Easy. You voted for a party that would restrict the NHS, the actual health service that gives things for free. You wanted to restrict that. You voted for it. You wanted to reduce the amount of money that you receive for when you're on benefits. You voted for that. You voted for these things. Less police on the streets. You voted for that. For immigration to be at a massive scale and it to be an absolute clusterfuck. You voted for that. You have been listened to every single time. Like a crying child, you have been listened to. You want the bottle? Have the bottle. There you go. Okay? You've had spokespeople. You've had Suella Braverman, you had Preet Patel, you had Rishi, you had everybody on your side. You had people who you had as tokens. You had token ethnics. This is big. You have been listened to. For nearly 15 years, you have been listened to. You wanted a guy who would put rules in place and break them himself because he's good old Boris. You got that. You wanted that. You begged for that. You cried for that. You wanted that. You've been listened to. So now you've got what you wanted. You're crying more that you've not been listened to. Now, the issue with all of this comes down to this. No one actually knows what you want, but also people are not really willing to care anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't articulate anything you want. You can't. Clearly, you can't. Like, there's no actual thing you want other than to see people who don't look like you. And that is what I find hilarious, because I look at myself and I look at the common white British man, and I don't see a difference in Britishness, for example. I don't. Never actually will. Because why? Guess what? I'm from a Commonwealth country. There's one country that cannot complain about being taken over by anything, and that is the United Kingdom. Like, how are we hearing, I can't say the P word, I probably could, but PAKI, telling them to go home. But you were there in the first place. Like, how are you telling, how are you beating up a black person for being in the country when they were born in the same city as you? But also, to make things worse, where they're from, there's a good chance that, I don't know, the United Kingdom were there too. You boast about having an empire, but then you cry about the effects of having an empire. That is incredible. That is absolutely incredible. That literally doesn't make any sense at all. Also, one of your ringleaders is literally getting a tan in Cyprus or whatever he is. Like, you're led by the blind and you're literally chess pieces in a chess game which the leaders aren't even playing. They're AFK. They're not even about. Like, do you understand how stupid you now sound? You probably don't, because you've already made your mind up. I'm trying my best to not generalize who is out there. I don't want to call them all stupid. I don't want to call them all uneducated. I don't want to call them anything. However, it hurts because I've seen children skipping down the road screaming that I have to go home. Well, little child, the other one's out past your bedtime. If anyone should be going home, it's you. Okay, and given that your parents have an inability to parent you, maybe they should be going home. But hey, And what I love about this is that they're covering up their faces while being proud patriots and being proud for what they stand for. Great, that's all good. If you're proud for what you stand for, you want to make your messages heard, take off the mask. Like, take off the masks. It's the only thing I disagree with that as well. I know that like the counter protests that I'm like a part of or adjacent to, they're saying, mask up, guys, you have to mask up. No, why? Why? We're not calling for anyone to go home. We're not calling for anyone to be deported. We're not risking our jobs here. We can still go into our news agents that happens to be owned by someone who doesn't look like a white person, for example. We can still go in there. Why we weren't shouting for them to go home? We can still go to the kebab shop. We can still we can still do all these things. Why? Because we're not chanting for them to go home. For the ones wearing masks, they still want to have their cake and eat it, but they've had so much cake, their blood sugar levels so high, they have no idea what they're actually doing anymore, and they're just absolutely delirious. And this is what it wasn't even like the social media misinformation. It wasn't any of it. It comes down to 15 years of being told that you're not being listened to while just being listened to.
Agreed.
You have been pandered to at every single like turning, juncture, discussion. It's been literally about what you've wanted. So it's not just the people protesting, it's the people who vote conservative, the people who vote reform, the people who are Labour, but they don't like certain people in the country. It's about the people who want to actively oppose other people's viewpoints because they need to own the libs. And then you ask yourself, why is the country not working? Why can't I get a doctor's appointment? Why are all my teeth falling out? I can't go see a dentist. You wanted this. You begged for it. You cried for this. And now you got it. So in America, where I'm also from, that we have a guy saying that we have to protect the black jobs. And that's not gone down well, has it? He said that in front of a whole lot of black journalists. Again, it's not gone down well. And now we have arguably going to be the first female president. And hopefully that's how it's going to go down.
Hopefully, yeah.
And you look at that and you go, well, we've already had all those things. The first ethnic minority, the first woman, we've had those things. Have they been good? Up for debate. Some of them we don't even need to debate. We just know their shit. However, I look at America and I go, they're so far backwards. They're so far backwards. And then I remember what I always say. The UK tries its best to be the US's little brother. So the same protests we saw in Charlottesville, the same tiki torches we saw, the Ku Klux Klan being pretty much boldened and walking down the road with torches, we're seeing variations of that over here. I've had to postpone a trip to a different part of the country because of what could happen and my safety. It is 2024. I don't think that there's a lot of people who would actually stand for the nonsense that anyone on the far right even has to offer. I think that a lot of people, just as the far right and the neo-Nazis are emboldened into violence, I think the people who are against it are also emboldened into violence. It's not going to be a civil war, as Elon Musk says, but what's probably going to happen is, and we'll come to that fucking dipshit in a minute,
Yeah.
is this. It's going to simmer down in a couple of weeks. And the people who are wearing masks and destroying up the shops, they're going to go back to their shops and they're going to see the same Asian guy who they didn't like, and they're going to buy their milk sheepishly, and they're going to go home and cry about it. You've had it all. You've had every single opportunity. And you've complained at the messes that you have literally voted to create. So now, notice I haven't said anything mean about any of, if you're listening to this, any of you or any of them. Why? Because I'm at this point now where saying something mean about them just gets something mean back in response, and we go into a back and forth. Just like if you're on the street. I'm not going to change their minds on the streets. No. What I find really funny, though, out of all of this, is that if you read the discourse online, there's people who are of the belief that the news is against them, that the big media is against them. You have literally voted to have control over those things. The guys in charge of the BBC funded the Conservative Party. That is you. That is your voice. So they can't be complicit in anything against you.
Also, just to add, how much has Nigel Farage been on different talk outlets, on different news things, on just in fucking media in general?
You could say too much, but then the diplomat in me wants to say he should be. But there's never any counter to him, though.
My point I just want to make, even though I agree with what you're about to say, but my point is that you're not being heard because your voices are literally being echoed. Like the thing that was stumping me was the realization that people are upset with being told that they're like, I think we talked about this in the past, but the freedom of speech thing where we recognize like you're allowed to speak, and then for some reason people think that because they have the freedom of speech, that means no one can complain about them speaking.
Yeah,
no one can tell them they're wrong.
But
yeah,
they don't understand the freedom of consequence either.
Yeah,
it's throwing out a jab, but not getting your hand back up to defend yourself.
it's also, it is still freedom of speech. Like it's not even like a new different thing. It's like you get to say one thing and I get to say you're talking absolute bollocks. Like you're not telling the truth. Or I'm allowed to say I disagree with you entirely. Or I'm allowed to say I don't think that you hold values that you think you hold or whatever. I'm allowed to say that shit because that's my version of it. That's what I am allowed to say. So it's absolute. It's beyond just the echoing, the fact that there are literal people you can talk about who have been giving these views regularly, mind, and the idea that, oh, we're not being heard. But the fact that, no, it's not because there aren't people talking, but it's because they don't like that people are telling them they're wrong. And people are telling them that you shouldn't say those things. Like me saying, I don't think you should say that, I think you're wrong, is somehow me encroaching on their right of free speech, which is absolute fucking nonsense. Anyway, please keep going. I don't
They're
want
trying
you
to censor me. They're trying to censor me. They're trying to
Yeah.
me. Oh no. Oh no. Like, I hate it when comedians in America come, or like Graham Linehan, and they're like, "Oh, I'm being cancelled." You're still on a social media platform. You're still talking. You still do shows. You still write and produce things. Nobody wants to work with you because you're a cunt.
Yes.
You've not been cancelled. You've not been cancelled. But what seems to happen with these guys is this: they complain about these problems, and they then deal with the outcome of being listened to, and they can't actually handle it. Like, it's like, part of me thinks, oh, we shouldn't let them vote, but I realize that's a terrible whole thing, and a whole can of worms there as well. But then, let them vote. They voted. Their team didn't win again. Maybe they are being listened to, but there's just not enough of them for people to actually listen anymore. Because what's happened is, people have looked at this and gone, wait a second, Conservatives haven't been doing anything good for us. We need to vote these guys out. I like what Labour's doing. I like what the Green Party's doing. I like what Reform is doing. I like what the Lib Dems are doing. And they've divested into different political parties. So it's not just one far right party now. There is two. And what I'm hoping from the political side of all this is that the Conservative Party actually, I don't mind if Reform becomes the main far right party. Let them. Because then they're all in one place. I hope that the Conservative Party, though, reverts back to being the normal right-wing party it should be. Because now you can't discuss anything with a Conservative, because all they are is talking points and slogans. And that's the only thing that I've actually looked at and I've gone, throughout history, you could actually have a conversation with a Conservative and it could go half well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're at a point where they just wave flags and cry. Like, what's the point? I mentioned that I have a Conservative friend like a few episodes back. Yeah, she's fully now not voting for them. I think she said Lib Dems. Who knows?
Well, a lot of Conservatives voted Lib Dems. So I'm not shocked.
Yeah. So, like, done a full shift as well, just down to things like this. Like, I think the message was, I can't stand for this anymore. Simple as. Because, again, what is your end goal here? You want to get rid of all immigrants. Okay, cool. How? Including yourself, most likely?
Yeah.
Like, if I were to do the Thanos snap and only get rid of immigrants, tell you right now, man, half of the people in Southport are gone.
There's a lot more than 50% of this country that could be considered immigrants.
Again, it depends on, like, how British they want it to be. Because they want it to be a snap and get rid of anyone who, if this isn't British, right? That means having a British passport, for example. Cool. You're aware that Stephen Yaxley Lennon, aka Tommy Robinson, has an Irish passport. He's gone. So you are literally bidding and doing the bidding of frauds, which means that you yourself is a fraud. So then, when you get home, because I feel like this will probably end up reaching the far right, but when you get home and you take your mask off and you sit in your DFS sofa and you hang your Union Jack flag up and it falls down again, and you hang up and it falls down again, you hang up and it falls down again, because even that doesn't want to stand for you anymore.
By the way, it won't be a Union Jack. It won't be. It'll be a St. George's Cross. We know.
No, most of these guys had Union Jacks because they're not very smart. Okay.
Okay.
So, you have all those things. You take off your shoes, and then you go and you say, "Babe, I'm hungry." And you go and you open up your phone and you go on Deliveroo, and then you realize something. You spent the whole day protesting the very thing that you are a consumer of. You are a consumer of immigration. You voted against it, and now you saw what happens because your Deliveroo orders now take longer. The service at supermarkets has become so automated now because nobody wants to work in a supermarket who's British, quote unquote British.
Also, just to add, if you've ever used the NHS, you're a benefiter of immigration by a large margin.
Of course. Margin. Anything you want. You're a consumer of it.
I just say particularly with NHS, for example, because the NHS doesn't work with the way that, like with the people who have benefited it. If immigration hadn't existed, it literally couldn't exist. Like it's a fact of it.
They complain about British jobs. I didn't think I'll ever hear this. They're taking British jobs. So you are like, when we heard about black jobs from Donald Trump, we were like, that's so stupid, makes no sense. You're literally complaining because you want effectively a white job. Because British jobs are there, apparently, but you're not taking them. Like, cool, what's a British job then? Give me a description. Tell me what a British job is. And they can't do it. Do you want to work as a bin man? Because guess what? I've seen a lot of British people work as bin men. They're not, cool. Do you want to be a GP? Oh, wait, you can't. You can't because you spent all your time fighting an invisible boogeyman that isn't hurting you, and you ain't even qualified to be a doctor, but you want to be the British jobs,
Yeah, my mum's granddad was a dustman,
Yeah, like
with a horse and cart back then. But yeah, like
you want to be British so badly, but you don't actually know what it means. You have no culture, you have no identity apart from whatever figures and icons you look up to for guidance and direction. As I said before, the figures of guidance and the icons of structure don't care for you. I haven't seen Lawrence Fox out parading himself. I haven't seen Tommy Robinson. I haven't seen any of these people. I've seen the crazy ones. Credit to them. The neo-Nazi guy showed up in force. He can at least, stand on business. Credit to you, neo-Nazi guy. You stood on business. Great. Cool. When would the UK finally, and by that I mean the governments and the police and things like that, finally take this stuff seriously? And I mean, looking at what happened in Charlottesville in America with the KKK and the Proud Boys and things like that, when would they now take it seriously and actually take these people down and make a mockery of them as well? Because that's the issue. We had Nigel Farage, we had no one actually be in opposition to him. And by that, I mean, not some, this is going to sound awful, not some blubbering 22-year-old who just came out of university. I mean, get me someone who actually can be as composed as Farage is, If they're 22 and they happen to be just as composed as Farage, I'm good on them. But at the moment, the only people I see going up against people like him are young people like us or younger than us.
Mm-hmm.
That ain't doing shit. Get us someone, get us Corbyn. But they won't do that.
Yeah, it's the problem.
But yeah. So now I have to be somewhat fearful. I actually notice it. I'm in a very, very, very multicultural place. Ooh, Hackney, ooh. But even then, there's people who are who I look at and go, no, were you at a protest? Were you writing? And the attitudes towards it as well, just the blasé nature of, oh, I'm not involved, so, there's so much you can do. There's so much you can do to help in terms of fighting anti-racism. And a lot of it doesn't require you to even leave your room. You can sign a petition online. You don't have to share it on social media. You just sign it yourself. You can actively look into organizations that help to actually promote things like diversity in communities. I know that people hate the idea of diversity being a thing and they claim it's forced. Trust me, you can't force diversity. Um, Diversity hires do not exist. It is so difficult to bullshit someone into a job unless you are grandfathered in through family or someone really, really likes you. So, yeah, that's not a thing. I don't know. I'm at the point now where I'm like, well, I have to watch my back when I go out the house now. If I go to certain parts of London, I'm going to, threatened or something, And it's very possible because it's happened to me before all of this, during Brexit time, it's happened. In Camden, of all places. So these are the things that we have to now be careful of. So as a person of color, a term that we all know I hate, but using it, you have to be fearful now of more things. If somebody attacks me on the train, I can guarantee that the majority of people would just be idle to it. Then I get their phone out and film it, but they wouldn't help. And that's the sad thing. The issue isn't these people protesting, it's the lack of a strong response to it by the country who claims to not be racist. But I don't know.
Yeah, I want to just add to this. I guess it's two things, but they're kind of sort of pushed into one, which is the idea of this this phrase of British values, and these sort of legitimate concerns these are being wiped out. Firstly, this is just the what is the argument again? It's the white genocide argument, which is just absolute bullshit, which has been on the internet for fucking years and has so much against it. You can look it up if you want to. I honestly would recommend it only purely for an argumentation perspective, but it's honestly cancerous to read about. And then the other aspect is, and talking to people, and if you ever get someone who is genuinely wanting to parrot about British values, please get them to give a definition of what the fuck that means and not have it just be them discussing about things they're scared of rather than and actually talk about things that are definitively British that are under that are under threat. And even the fears that they have are generally completely unsubstantiated and are based on like propaganda they've seen online. And when it comes up, like if you have any, and honestly, I think the big, this is just a period of time in my life where this is now occurring, but I'm quite motivated at this point to be very, very up to date on this particular information because I really want this to stop. Like this has gotten to me in a way that I think partly because I'm doing much better mentally right now has actually kind of motivated me to be much more. Well, it hasn't motivated me. It has revealed my motivation for this kind of thing to end. Whereas previously, my motivation was just existed. I hated all of this shit, but I honestly couldn't get my mind in order to actually feel the way I should feel about this. And now I do. The other part is that I really want to push against this bullshit that they are being patriotic. I hate these sentiments about patriotism. I used to have the opinion that patriotism just as an idea was in itself racist. And I understand why it had that idea. Because everyone who was fucking using the word was pretty much doing so and also happening to be these horrible individuals, right? EDL, BNF, etc. What I will point out is patriotism, and this is what I had a sort of epiphany when a person I met, who is a friend of mine, called herself a patriot, and I know what her beliefs are, and I know how she thinks. She is proud to be British, but she is not anyone like these people. And I sort of had to, what's the word, like meditate on that idea. Like, what does that mean? And listening to how she felt and thought about things, like, what does that even mean? And then I realized that there's a truth to some aspect of what she said. And I think actually that the problem is that we have been hoodwinked into believing that acting like a fucking fascist neo-Nazi, like, individual who's like xenophobic, unable to anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, racist, unable to actually like think about the idea of a country in its own right, and is purely just a scared little boy, because a lot of these are men, but of course women as well, scared little boys and girls who are just out there, and they're too scared and they're too ignorant and have no interest at this point in their lives, whether they were taught this way or whether just because they are literally flagrantly incapable of like taking this stance to think about what the actual problems may be and actually try to instigate change in a positive way, are just truly out there to just point out all of these things about society, which they can talk about one thing being negative and be correct, and then take that negative thing that is correct and turn it into this other thing which is not, because it's easy, because it requires so little effort, because it's this social bias that they can use and all of that. We have been hoodwinked into believing that patriotic means that. Honestly, I think many people on the left are far more patriotic than people on the right, personally. And what I mean by that is because I think there are people on the left who actually care about a country's state of being and the people in that country.
Yeah, I heard Danish people, a Danish person say, Americans and British people have a weird idea of patriotism. They describe patriotism as destroying where they live and complaining about who lives there. My version of patriotism is, and by the way, I'm sure that there is like the same version of these people in Denmark as well. But you know, he said that his patriotism is making sure the streets are clean and being happy to pay taxes towards keeping those streets clean, and not in a like get rid of all the criminals clean. Just make sure like the actual like street is not messy. Being proud of our buildings, being proud of the institutions that we have, and supporting those institutions. You know,
civic pride, civic responsibility. Like
one of the things that like I don't really ever say I'm proud to be British, because, and the reason why I always say I'm not is because there's other people who wish I wasn't British. So
oh yeah, and neither would I. Honestly, I'm in agreement as far as in the same exact same reason, but I am very much on the same wavelength of why I don't say these things.
So it's like, it's not because of the view it could give off. Like, oh, he says he's a patriot, like part of that group of people. No, it's because I legitimately can't be proud to be something that people don't want me to be a part of. Like, if I say I'm proud to be an Arsenal fan, sure, because there's people who would rather I wasn't an Arsenal fan, but they're not going to cause a stink up about it. Instead, they're just going to grill me when we lose. You know, all of my friends are Tottenham fans. When we lose, they grill me for it, but they don't beg me to become Tottenham fans, do they? No. Nor do they wish that I was never an Arsenal fan. They don't care. But the difference between that and, because that's the thing, they view this as like a football team style thing as well, which is even scarier. They have like a scoring system. Like, they feel like they're playing for a team. Guys, none of you are Kevin De Bruyne, and this isn't Man City. You guys suck. Like, there's nothing good about you in this mode, in this realm, in this situation that you're in. So, like, the idea of being a patriot, what are you proud of? Because you just destroyed the things, and you're destroying the things in which you should be happy to have. This is what I'm saying. Like, everyone's super quick to point out that these protests are being like shipped in from different parts of the country. So like I think they were saying like in Leicester, maybe it could have been. I think in like these people aren't from Leicester. Like, they just showed up here and they're destroying all our shops. Cool. What now then? Because in my eyes, I don't want to say you guys should be outside those shops and putting up an armed guard, but I'm sure there's a lot you could do to help the people in Leicester who are your neighbours, who aren't white, well, pretty much who aren't British even. A lot better than just sitting there going, it's not us. I'm tired of having to give everyone the answers. Same with other ethnic minorities and people who aren't British. I realise that, you know, speaking about a lot of this stuff, there are people who are white who aren't British, and by that I mean they're Eastern European, who are also getting quite a lot of flack right now. But what tends to happen is if they don't look Eastern Europe, so you know, I had heard reports, but I think it's one of those things where you just look at it and you go, well, you you don't really know what to expect now because the amount of arrests should be in the thousands. I don't think we have the infrastructure for that. A lot of people are gonna get off somewhat free. I think that
Again, the Conservatives helped with that.
yeah,
Just want to point out.
yeah. I think that also like to the first thing you said about like how this all started, like with the Southport stabbing, like the kid had autism or has autism, and
I did not know that. It's new information.
yeah, like that's been a thing. But like again, like all indications that this is like what the hell, this is random, and it all points to a mental break. Which is funny enough.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a white kid that did it, everyone would be like, "Oh, it was a sad thing," as we've seen in America mostly, but also over here, a psychotic episode, like Raoul Moat, for example, a psychotic episode. But that leeway isn't given to us, you know.
Yeah.
So, and of course, what was originally spread was that it was a guy who came over last week, which I find incredible, being able to get all the way to Southport from Dover. How far away is Southport and Dover?
Do you know the answer? Or are you just asking me?
I'm asking. I'm actually asking.
I'll go have a look quickly.
Like, just in general, because like I'm very confused at how that happened. It is a 5-hour drive. So yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
very, very far away is the answer.
Cool. How did he get to Southport? You know, but that's the thing. I don't. I was gonna say I don't want to dwell on it for too long. We've dwelled on it for a very long time. I mean, probably could continue if we really wanted to, but let's not. Do you have anything more to add?
I have something more refreshing to add, because I do want to say that, like, this had. I don't want to. I don't. We did not make this in order to be political specifically. We said that we would talk about politics and stuff. So I want to kind of stress that while this is like, the reason again that I don't care about talking about Trump at this point and everything like that is honestly because it's not relevant to me right now, and because we're not political. This isn't a political show, and we would just be political where it is where it matters to us, especially in relation to our mental health. The fact that I have been focused on this has actually been as a result of both the fact that it has upset me so much, and also because I myself am in a much better place mentally so as to talk about it, and I wanted to mention that to kind of reference the fact that this is a good thing that I am reacting to this. This isn't a bad thing. The second part as well is that I wanted to just talk about like something that I've been watching recently, which has really helped me through all of this, and has actually given me like a big lease of life recently, and has made it a lot easier for me to kind of engage with this without doing what I used to do, which was run away and kind of ignore it. Everyone knows about this channel. Like, I'm sure so many people know about this channel, but I just want people to go back and watch his content again, because I think he might actually be, in my express opinion, one of the greatest content creators on YouTube and possibly on the internet.
So who's this again?
That's very debatable. I was just about to say it, but and let me actually get his full name, because I know his channel name and I know his first name, but I don't know his full name.
Give me the channel name while you're looking it
up. Vsauce.
Oh, okay.
Everyone knows this channel. Michael Stevens. There you go. This is not me. This is not me like shouting out like a tiny person or nothing. That's not the reason why. The fact is that I think he's one of the greatest content creators that has existed, in terms of, I think, the consistency of his content, the fact that he produces incredibly powerful and impactful content in terms of like when you watch it. I think the stuff that he talks about is incredibly interesting, and I think it has a lot to give watching his content, like as far as like stuff you can actually take on and use, and also just ideas that you can use and so on. he has not put out as much content in the last bit, but I have no problem with that because why would I? But even like his most recent stuff has some of his best work that I think I've ever seen. Even stuff which is like, again, this is nothing to do with politics or whatever. This is just strictly like good stuff. Illusions of Time, The Future of Reasoning is something that I'm about to send out to Alex as well, that I've already sent to my mum, because it's, I think, a very, very interesting video. The Future of Reasoning in relation to this particular topic that we've been talking about today is incredibly important, and I wish more people were aware of this. As well as like more fun things like Did People Used to Look Older, which is about and Delusions of Time. Both of them are about like essentially perception and memory. Do Chairs Exist, which is a talk about philosophy and ontology, and also just having people think about the world in a more interesting way, and so many other things. Like lots of his stuff that used to be on premium or you had to pay for it is now not, like Minefield, which is about like psychology experiments and stuff, which I've only just realized is not that you don't have to pay for. Like lots of these episodes I haven't seen, and I realize I should absolutely watch these now because I completely, utterly didn't realize that they'd stopped being on premium. Because obviously YouTube was in the beginnings of its like whole thing, and some of this stuff is literally when he started doing this Minefield thing was about 7 years ago. So like there's like a period of like 2 years or so, or maybe 3 years, where he was putting out this kind of content which some people didn't get to see, like me, and now it's available. So please go and watch that. And he is an incredibly good at getting information across, and is incredibly enjoyable to watch. Like ultimately, he is enjoyable to watch, and he has done so much to to provide and like to provide information that that ultimately I think has done so much for science education, that I genuinely can't think of another person who is as unique in the way he does it. There's obviously lots of people we can talk about. Some of them like have various levels of fame. I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, is a very good one. You can talk about like Dawkins or whatever. You can talk, you choose whatever one is your preferential one. But I do think that Vsauce is probably the most unique, most interesting, and also most well developed. And I find that a lot of his videos have have incredibly little, like what's the right way of it? What's the word for it? Like there's a lot, like of all of the people, I find that his content seems to have the least amount of issue. Like people have the least amount of issues with in terms of his, in terms of both how he chooses to phrase things, where he is not being overly one side or another in terms of talking about certain conversations in order to make sure that it gets to a lot of people really well. So I think he's incredibly good at communicating on that front. And also, I think in just that the information he says isn't fucking bullshit, and he isn't making tons of mistakes, and he's very, very careful about that. So this isn't really a shout out to be like, hey, if you hear about this channel that doesn't exist, I'm asking you to almost go back and listen to him again, because so like Which Way is Down is an incredibly interesting video which explains space-time and explains the dimension of, like, it's so remarkably interesting and so well done that it's like there's so many channels you can watch now about like mathematics, physics, science in general, psychology, whatever, but I still think that Vsauce is up there as probably one of the most consistent and brilliant people at doing this. And it's very healing, that like for me at least, it's been an incredibly healing process to watch some of this stuff again and just be reminded of not only quality content, but also just the things I am learning and the ways in which it is enriching my personal mental experience and cognitive understanding of the world is what allows me to feel the way I do and like feel so much better, and also use that in these situations that we've described today, where I can feel as if I am thinking in the right way about these topics and discussions and so on. And I think we may have talked about this before, but I talked about this at least with Kez in the past, that I disrespect the notion, or I disrespect the wrong word. I dislike the notion of ignorance is bliss, because I think that there's so much. I think that a lot of ignorance breeds absolute horrible things for people. that I'm explaining that incredibly poorly, but you get the point. Like, I think that ignorance is not a blissless. It is not just an idea of bliss. I truly think that lots of people live their lives incredibly sad and completely ignorant of the world, because I think that actually that is, in many cases, what happens. I think there's many ideas that exist in that realm of the idea of ignorance is bliss that actually is bullshit, in terms of the way that people, like media, for example, has chosen to personify like being really intelligent or all this other crap, which is sometimes absolute bullshit as well, like not getting into IQ and stuff like that. But yeah, just wanted to talk about that because it's so good. I've enjoyed it and it's really been helping me. And it's made a huge difference in terms of how I have now felt comfortable being able to talk about this. Whereas I feel like if I hadn't, I feel like today I really wouldn't have been able to speak my mind. And feeling that I've gained an understanding just through watching some of this content, as well as it just helping me to feel better and feel more confident, has meant that I am very appreciative of this man's existence of what he's done. So yeah, just wanted to shout out a 22.2 million subscriber channel. But please do watch. Please watch. Yeah, it's unforgivably good.
Yeah. Like even on the ignorance is bliss thing, a lot of people say that they don't like watch the news and all that stuff, and that's cool. I actually don't watch the news either. As I said, I think it was to Ryan, actually, I only watch the news when it affects me. Of course, I've had to watch things a lot recently because it directly affects me.
Mm-hmm.
Ignorance is bliss is all well and good in terms of like being bogged down by the news, but getting a world view and learning about different cultures as well, different lifestyles and different parts of the world as well. It's such a unique thing that the internet has given us at our fingertips effectively. I'm making a segment. Yeah, I meant to bring up in like the worst segue possible, but no, this is a good segue. Alex Cooper's rogue listen of the Wizard don't really align with anything that I've actually like said before, or who people may think I am, or people who know me personally think I am. I listen to them and I enjoy them, or I find something useful in them. So this is my rogue listen of the week. I am a big fan of and this is people are going to typecast me already. The Rest is Politics is a really good podcast. I enjoy it with two former MPs, Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart. Alistair Campbell's former Labour guy. Rory Stewart's a former Conservative guy. Voting records aside, just as people, you kind of really wish that Rory Stewart actually did win Tory leadership, because it would have been a lot better than the state of the government now. So with that being said, they have a second podcast called Lead, former world leaders or business people, things like that. Really well done, really like professionally like orchestrated.
Can you repeat that title again for me, please?
Leading.
Okay.
Yeah. And they had Nick Clegg on for part 1 and part 2. So yeah, I know, right? So it was like a 3-hour conversation in total, maybe not even. Honestly, Nick Clegg reminds me of if you took our good friend Joe here, you gave him some cocaine, and you told him you can do whatever you want, buddy. like it's just he's a guy who just went, I can do it, and did not realistically plan for anything he was trying to do. And you kind of just see how he explains things and how they all went wrong, and how the part 2 especially, the first best 5 minutes I've ever listened to on a podcast, because it's literally just like the show is supposed to be this nice, really composed, like laid back, just discussion on how like, oh yeah, like swap with the coalition and all that stuff, Nick Clegg, like work with David Cameron. And the first 5 minutes he has a full on mental breakdown, in the least like legitimate way. And he just describes how like step by step nothing went right and he hated it about being the deputy prime minister. And it was just like 5 minutes of no one interrupting him. Alistair said nothing, Rory said nothing. And he just like went into how he became a smoker, how he started kickboxing. And I was like, damn, don't want to be a politician now. Like, never did, but Jesus. So I think it's a good listen, part 1 and part 2. But if you really don't want to listen to anything political, just listen to the first 5 minutes of part 2. For it's an insight into how like ludicrous and how naive, especially the whole parliamentary system is. So that Rory and Nick and Alice as well, all three of them are like, yeah, we were pretty naive entering politics at this level, like, which is also a pretty sad thing of the idea that they can create change, and the idea that like what they see should be done just doesn't get done, and the frustration that lies with him being a member of parliament. And similar to like how Joe was saying earlier about just learning different things, and ignorance isn't a blissful thing. I do feel like learning about people who don't always agree with you entirely is a really important thing to do. Part of the reason why this episode was fairly well mannered in its delivery, I would say, is because I know people who either got indoctrinated into the far right, were indoctrinated into the far right, or are adjacent to it, and I've heard them speak about it to my face from a fairly young age, because Hackney being multicultural, but also even now, like working in Calais, meeting police officers who like, hated me and threatened to tase me, and then heard my accent and went, "Oh, we can talk." Like, you understand. And I think the best way to beat any sort of prejudice, fascism, anything like that, is to understand why it exists in the first place. And not in oh, it exists because of this capitalist thing from here. No, no, no. On the ground, why it exists. Like, why do they feel like they have to be this way? Oh, social media. No, 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 no. No. Because social media also says that if you want to make a pie, thanks to Google AI, if you want to make a pie, you can put 2 quarts of bleach in it. But they're not listening to that, are they? So you have to understand why they're susceptible to these things. And the only way you can really get that is by actually speaking to them, experiencing these things, which is why I feel like a lot of people who are my skin color, my age, they've seen it now. And a way that we can now understand, especially grow up in Hackney, because how different it is, how diverse it is, they understand, oh, they're like this because of this. And you no longer become viscerally angry with them. You become quite pitiful. And you become quite, I don't want to say empathetic to it, but you become quite, I don't know what the right word is, but you no longer feel like they are actually in control of what they're thinking. And you go, oh, I know how this happened. And you can just go, do you know what? I can't save everybody. I probably can't save them there. Because it's super easy to say, you're a racist, you're a dick, you're this, that. But what are we actually doing now long term to eradicate this stuff? And the only way we can really eradicate it from like the people who are our age and younger, I mean like literal teenagers, is by countering what they hear in their houses. Like, being a racist didn't start last week. It's been around before social media, well before social media, well before newspapers. It's been around forever. So forget social media. How do we actually just counter the ideas of racism that are just in society and ingrained in society? So yeah, listening to people is good. I'm not saying go and listen to Tommy Robinson and Lawrence Fox. No, I'm saying when you hear someone talking about these things and they have a viewpoint that seems a bit on the right to you, don't just shut it down and walk away. If you like the person, listen to them. You don't have to come to an agreement, just listen. That's if you want to. You don't have to do any of this. You can do absolutely nothing. There's zero pressure on you to do any of these things.
It's not everyone's responsibility. Yeah.
It's just the idea that we're asking ourselves today, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And we're pointing fingers at social media and individuals. They play a part, but at the core of it, it's just racism exists. Like, and it has before we had a phone in our hand, and it will probably exist afterwards too. But yeah, that's it. I don't know. We're here.
You've got to kill the cancer somewhere, so let's try and figure that out.
Bullet to the head.
Yeah, but how big is his head and how big is your bullet?
Big enough.
Not very big. Big and not very big, I think, are the respectively, I think is the answer.
But yeah, like just to end as well, like there are positive things happening in the world. the moment. They are. The Olympics is going on. It's pretty fun. It's pretty
Yeah, I'm
fun.
not gonna lie. I haven't been paying any fucking attention to it. I think other things have just gotten in my way. So
Yeah, like it's been pretty fun. The general good vibes that is just the football transfer window has been pretty fun as well. They're things that you can dive yourself in. I'm playing 2077, whatever it's called. Yeah, there we go, England. So yeah, there are things that you can definitely sink your teeth into if you want to escape. That's that.
that's that. This is
So we are
this is a long one, but we're making up for it.
so we are gonna take it's damn near 2 hours. Great. We're gonna take 2 steps to the rear and get out of here. We're in the wind. See ya.
Love you all.
Fucking hell, 2 hours.